And we're alive.
Okay, everybody, we are the House Education Committee on March 13th, 2025. Taking a look at H 129, which is our oft forgotten school construction bill. So committee, let's just talk at a very high level. First of all, I think when we continually talk about consolidation, sort of the big issues we hear over and over and over again, and I think we all have come to an agreement that you can't really talk about consolidation unless you also have school construction on the bill. So this bill is currently a standalone bill, but we would probably fold it into a larger bill, making it as big as possible. I think because we haven't visited this in a while, maybe John, just have you at a high level walk us through it again.
Sure.
Can I suggest something slightly different?
Please.
I think we need to identify what are the things we haven't decided. And are we gonna decide that?
Right.
Oh, in this
In
bill?
relation.
Yes.
Yeah, because I have one.
None.
Right. So,
I gave you the dog face.
I know.
so within the
Can't tell
bill,
if that's serious or.
No, I'm serious. I don't-
Okay, so what do you mean by that?
What do you mean by that?
What are the unresolved questions in
Yes,
this bill? Setting aside money.
Okay.
Because we can't answer that alone, but it absolutely has to be answered.
oh,
So what are the policy things in here that we have not, that we're kind of keeps circling on like, that isn't totally fleshed out, that isn't totally fleshed
Okay.
out. Like we're at flesh out time.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, if that's the question.
that is the
Literally.
question.
So
Yeah, it's time to flesh.
Yeah.
I'll just say for me, it sort of aligns with other conversations we've been having. Rulemaking in here goes to the Agency of Education. I am yet to be convinced that's the right place for rulemaking. I'm not trying to say it isn't, but I have great concerns about capacity there, or even whether they're the best place for rulemaking. And so my question would be, who has done rulemaking in the past? This, I believe, is this change. So where the rulemaking was in the past and where it's most appropriate.
State board, but it hasn't happened in a really, really long time.
Right, okay, so, and again, this is my personal perspective. I'm still looking down the road of resourcing and strengthening the state board, and maybe that's the more appropriate place for it. I'm just putting it out there.
So I'm just gonna make a list here, the unresolved
So for me, it's that. I might have others.
big decisions.
Where the
Rulemaking.
rulemaking is.
Yeah.
Okay, currently, or let's see, what section is that?
Oh, gosh, I was just trying to find it when I
So I saw
took my mouth.
rulemaking,
It's here.
but,
John.
so I think it's line right around 13 or so on page 2.
It is in the beginning.
The
should be
agency
the
shall be
list.
responsible for implementing, and then number 2 on line 15 is adopting rules pursuant to. I think that's
I was gonna identify myself, John Gray,
Please.
Ledge Council, in the event you guys pull me in, but that's right. If I could offer one thing here as well, if you're having the discussion around where rulemaking might go, the other way to approach this question is to think about the things that belong in rulemaking, which things you might want to specify, because you may have different
Good point.
concerns about the delegation of that authority, depending on what the scope of the authority granted is. So if you spell out pieces that you care about a lot in statute, you may have reduced anxiety about extending or delegating that authority. So just something.
Excellent, thank you.
Good perspective.
Makes my head hurt. My whole,
Yeah.
that's my whole body hurt.
Rulemaking, other things that people feel, or do you want to lead this? Do you think you have, I think you
No.
probably know what we
I
haven't
think you have,
decided.
I think you are probably better positioned to lead. When I hear a subject, I have a lot of thoughts that come up. So the other thing I would say on rulemaking is, the two pieces that we've really talked about in rulemaking that can build out a lot of the substance of the program that you may have concerns about delegation are what the bonus incentives are.
Yes,
And the prioritization criteria. So I think resolving If you would like to figure those out, or if you would like them to just be in rulemaking is an important question to address. At this point, it's just letting them be in rulemaking.
Okay, that was my next point, exactly, so it's, exactly, are we literally making the list here of what they are, or are we saying who's doing it? And when?
What was the recommendation of the, task force?
I believe it was rulemaking. I don't believe, I'm
Can
not, please, yeah.
I would love your characterization of how, I think it was a non-decision.
That-
Yeah.
So
Basically.
reading the room of
Yes,
the,
thank
of
you.
the group, my view was that it was not a commitment to it being in rulemaking, but kind of like, this is as far as folks got.
Yeah, you're
Okay.
absolutely right now, but I'm,
And if I could
and
just,
it was to bring it here, basically.
Yeah.
To the,
and I could, if I could just add, because I happen to have had a chance to talk to her about this. I did ask Representative Emmons
Yeah.
about that, and that was exactly what her,
Her character.
yeah.
Okay. Ben?
I think there was still some conversation having about the advisory board piece.
Yes.
Yep.
Because I've noticed in there, it
Yep.
also talks about adoption rules, and
Yes.
I know there was,
Right.
is the advisory board necessary,
Yes.
not necessary? If it is, what should it do?
That was the next and last major thing on my list, was undecided,
Yeah.
and they're all somewhat connected.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
it's all sort of about who's ultimately deciding. Are we making
right.
a little bit more of a, taking a little more of a stand here, or are we?
And just as a reminder, our discussion started off, over the summer with the committee being the gatekeeper or the advisory board, what we're calling it now, being the gatekeeper to the rulemaking. Yes or no, up or down vote, what they have to present them as a rule, if they can move forward, but.
Yeah, just context for the group that maybe this will not be jogging any memories since you weren't part of the working group, but basically the program is set up to have so much of the program build out done through rulemaking, and the advisory committee would be in a position to work with the Agency of Education to fill out what the program is. That advisory committee is, as currently drafted, intended to be sunsetted after a 10-year period, I think is the time period. So it's meant to be helping kick off the program. And the question was, to what extent should the advisory committee have substantive provisions beyond advisory? Like how much of a role should they play in this process? It is purely advisory at this point,
Yeah.
but one concept that had been debated was whether or not rulemaking should kind of flow through the committee. It would no longer be advisory if you did something like that.
So I have a question about that. It was the creation of the advisory committee. Did it reflect the fact that rulemaking was going to move from the state board to the agency, so that you felt more need for the advisory committee? I guess that's my.
I did not read that to be the reason that an advisory board was chosen. I think this was in part looking at models from other states.
Yes.
And then
Mhm.
like Rhode Island had a comparable body set up there. Certainly you're right to identify that if this is meant to be a kicking off, like facilitating the program, it makes sense to be concerned when you're switching between bodies. But I think other testimony we had heard was that the state board, at least as currently situated, wouldn't be equipped either. So
Yeah.
I don't think it was solely in response to this transition. I think it was trying to be comparable to approaches taken in other states.
Director.
That's all I have.
So that brings us to the language in front of us,
Mhm.
which reflects, I think, what you just said. Which makes, I mean, makes me think that it's a fairly well considered way of doing it. I realize it is moving rulemaking away from the state board. They haven't done school construction rulemaking in decades, probably.
No one.
But it's not unchecked rulemaking by the agency either. It's got the advisory board working together with them. And the advisory board has to be created, of course, as well. I personally support the concept of the advisory board being the ones coming up with the bonuses, and what was the other term?
The prioritization.
Prioritization. Yeah. I guess the question is, what do we, is there a strong, and especially from the two of you, do you believe that there is a strong need to modify this further? I mean, I realize you guys sort of took it as far as you could with your summer study committee, but was that with the intention that you just go from here, or that it would be sort of torn apart and put back together again by this committee?
I don't believe we had the intent of it being torn apart and put it back together. We had more of an intent of having the committee's eyes on it and kind of getting consensus with the committee if it was the right path to take. Or if we needed to adjust any of the capabilities of the board.
I mean, I have concerns about also the state board being equipped to do this.
Concerns about
Or-
both.
And I sort of, in a way, the advisory committee is a bit of a stand-in for the state board. In these ones where it's sort of about something as concrete as literally concrete, I'm not sure I have as much concern about whether the state board's involved or not. It's not about educational quality. It's not about academics.
It could be.
But I just throw that out there as a point of discussion.
You
I wanna
say
hear what other
you
people
want a
say.
body that is gonna be
I guess
equipped to deal with
I'm
it.
fairly comfortable with what's written here without having given it a lot of deep thought.
I think I agree, and it's gonna tie back to now, like where we're going with the whole other everything ball of wax, which is that I feel one of the things that should be in our whatever comprehensive bill we create is clarity of the state board role. And I am at this moment persuaded of what we've heard from the chair and vice chair about state board needing more resources and needing to be returned to being a bit more public facing, and also needing to be laser focused on the big sets of rules that deal with education quality, EQS, special ed, CTE, and independent schools, and leaving the more building logistical pieces housed, and currently DQS is housed in AOE. And so if we're trying over here to refocus the state board in one direction, I'm concerned about then sending it in a different direction with this work. And therefore I come back to advisory authority, whatever this other group or body is, being important. I'm not sure I'm entirely persuaded that they should have a little bit more authority than what we gave them.
The advisory committee.
Yeah, but I don't, I'm a bit stuck on that.
Emily?
So I want to be clear about two things. One, my reason for calling this into question is it will take resources, no matter where it is, right? It's going to take resources. And the conversation we've been having, and I support, has been to resource both the state board and the agency to the capacity that they're needed and what their duties are. So it doesn't have anything to do with who should or shouldn't specifically, but about making sure that the capacity is there to do it. I'm not opposed to the advisory board existing, but in some ways it feels to me that the advisory board is put in place. And you just said something, Chair Conlon, that made me think that is true, that the advisory board is put in place because there isn't capacity to do it in either place. And the second thing, so give it to somebody who does, and that's fine. But the other thing I want to just really note, and I think you just alluded to it, the school construction program really needs to be student-centered. And the State Board of Education, I'm not saying the advisory board can't also be student-centered, it can be, but the state board, and so are the AUE, very focused on student needs. I mean, construction, I know I've been through the construction program many, many times in the past, and it really is the criteria around any approval is based on student need. And so I just want to make sure that, I just wanted to note that. And in the past, the state board, I know they haven't done rulemaking on this in a really long time, but neither has the AOE or anyone else. No one has. And so these are just things I'm noting and why I'm questioning it. That's all. I want to be able to put the resources where they belong.
Maybe just we should start on page 4 and walk through the advisory
Be great.
board and its creation and powers again.
Sure. Do you guys want me to hop into Zoom and screen share or?
No, we'll just go
We're
on
on
our places.
So section 3, we're talking about on the bottom of page 4, creating the State Aid for School Construction Advisory Board. This is to advise the agency on the implementation of the program in accordance with the provisions of this chapter, including specifically adoption of rules, setting of priorities, criteria for project approval. Those are the two pieces we just talked about as being kind of key rule elements, those priorities, and recommendations for project approval and prioritization. I would note that for the adoption of rules piece, we're pulling in the section 1 language about statement of purpose. So that will inform the rulemaking that's done. But in this case, we're just talking about an advisory board. It's composed of 8 members. So 4 who are ex officio, that's the state treasurer, commissioner of BGS, executive director of the bond bank, and then the chair of the State Board of Education. And then 4 members, none of whom are legislative, to serve 4-year terms, 2 by the Speaker of House, 2 by committee on committees. And these are meant to have expertise in education or construction, real estate, or finance. In one case, they're going to be a representative of a supervisory union. So that's something that we've talked about before, that you would have someone with a vested interest and potentially could be some conflict, and one of whom should be an educator. I can walk through the technical provisions related to the 4-year terms, but I'm guessing that is not a piece you guys are especially concerned about exploring.
Can I ask a question? Or,
Yeah.
In the line 20 where it says one of whom shall be an educator, what would happen if at some point we had no educators in the speaker of in the Vermont House?
No, this is not
These are
legislative.
non-legislative.
Oh, this is a non-legislative.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
And that was something that was explicitly discussed in
Yes, it was
the,
whether or not
was like,
legislators should be in those.
exactly.
meetings.
I think there's some effort to insulate from,
Politics, right?
The duties are starting at the bottom of page 6. And so the board is to advise the agency on the implementation of the program in accordance with the provisions of this chapter. And then it's just an inclusive list. So this is calling out things that especially have to be done, but broadly, you can understand this as just advising on kicking off the program. Like that's what this is. But by including these indicative examples in the inclusive list, you spell out in particular that these have to be handled, these have to be addressed by that board. So the first couple of these are what I think the group thought were most important things to be advised on, but the whole list is meant to be done. So advising on the rulemaking, advising on project priorities, and any proposed legislation that the board deems desirable and necessary. So this is meant to be kind of a check on, as the program is being launched, does the legislature need to make tweaks to it throughout the years that are ensuing? And if so, the board is meant to be the one in a role to help advise and provide that kind of guidance. So ensuring that the program gets off to a good start. On the top of page 7, advising on policies and procedures to reduce borrowing. The development of a formal enrollment projection model or the consideration of using projection models already available. I think this was one of slightly lesser concern for the group, but just calling out this one of the list examples. Procedures for applying for funds, grants, gifts, collection of prototypical school plans, which we talked about before, that if this is a renovation heavy program, that piece about prototypical plans is maybe less important. The genesis for this idea is if you are coming up with a program that's creating a lot of new schools, you could potentially reduce costs by having a store of those prototypical plans, but it will depend on what the actual program does, whether that kicks in. Determination of eligible cost components. You'll recall that we don't currently, and this is something that you might want to think about outside of the advisory board, but within the program. For the existing program, we have parameters for what the eligible cost components are. As you recall, the funds available through the program only go to eligible components. They don't go to the whole cost of the program. So what those eligible cost components should be. Development of a long-term vision for a statewide capital plan. maintaining data on the public school facilities, advising districts on the use of a needs survey, and encouraging districts and unions to investigate opportunities for the maximum utilization of space. To back out a little bit, since this is the end of the list of those advisory duties, these are meant to be largely duplicative of the things that the agency is independently tasked with doing to implement the program. So it's meant to be agency, you do these, you do this list of duties, and then advisory board, you kick in on these pieces. But broadly, they have the authority under this program to speak to anything about the implementation of the program. And I'm happy to, if you have questions about any of those particular duties, I'm happy to talk about it, but I would just, again, say it's really about a broad duty to advise on kicking off the program is what this is about.
Right. All right, where is the, where does developing bonuses and priorities fall in here? Is that
Yes,
strictly broadly under rules or?
that would be broadly under rules. And you can see that in sub 2 on line 17 on page 6, it explicitly calls out project priorities, but those would be done within rulemaking. That's the place where that happens. But I would note that that's a choice. It doesn't have to be that way. You can
Right,
spell
we can
out
put it in
exception. And if you're looking for the particular language where the independent duty comes from, which is for the agency itself, that is on page 2. Your subdivision 2, starting on line 15, and I can just read out for you guys. The agency is responsible for adopting rules, including rules to specify a point prioritization methodology and a bonus incentive structure aligned with the legislative intent. And this is the point that I was making earlier, that that first section where you can spell out what the aims of the program are funneled into the cabin, the discretion that is granted with that delegation of rulemaking authority. So that shapes the kind of rulemaking where it's your chance to voice how you would like to cabin rulemaking that's done for this program. Does that make sense?
All right. Comments or thoughts from the committee? Yeah.
So I think, keeping it as it is, keeping it with the advisory committee and working through the AOE is the right way to go about it. I think when I think of resources, while we know that both the AOE and the Board of Ed have limited resources for more work, I think the board is significantly more limited, both by staffing and by financial resources, whereas the AOE has the ability, having more staffing and more financial resources to shift if necessary. I think also as they grow, they're going to have more resources. I also think any thought that, so I do agree that the building, the makeup of the structure, rooms, facilities, all that is important to student outcomes. I think it's unsubstantiated that either agency is more committed to educational and student quality than the other. I think they're both vehemently dedicated to it, and to say one is better than the other, I think is short-sighted.
Emily?
Yeah, actually have something else, but just in reference to that, I don't actually believe one does have more student focus than the other. I think that's a true statement. My support for having state board being strengthened is simply the fact that they're a neutral, independent board. In their words, I'm using their words when they testify to us. That being said, going to something totally different.
Yep.
The makeup of this committee under appointed by this, I'm looking at page 5, line 17, the makeup of the speaker appoints, it says represent the supervisory union.
Yeah.
That needs to
We'll
be
probably need to change that.
shifted to something neutral, I think, because we don't know what we're gonna look like, but it's possible supervisory unions won't exist.
Can I ask the committee if, because I think if we're gonna dig into the membership of it, we need to first, let's backwards plan here. Are we agreeing as a committee to the concept of an advisory council, body, whatever we're calling it here.
Yes.
Yes.
With the alternative being non-advisory. and-
The alternatives being nothing, or that their powers are that they have more authority, that they're an authority, not an advisory.
I would respond, yes, I'm comfortable with it, because I think if we go to, if we give them full authority, we're also gotta give them a full budget. And we gotta give them a budget anyway, but,
Okay.
I would agree for that same reason that, you know, they're advisory. And I also would agree with leaving rulemaking for this with the AOE based on agreeing with what you said, what the state board needs to
Yeah.
really be laser focused on is not this.
Yeah.
They've got other really big issues to deal with.
Yeah, and I will say that this is where this is gonna get complicated, and I guess maybe it's all in the same bill, because my support of doing rulemaking here for the AOE is contingent on this other framework of a doubling down and clarity about the state board's role on education quality and being more public facing. So that's not in this bill,
Right.
but it's tied to the bigger, and for me, those two have to be together for me to support this.
And I'm in agreement.
Rulemaking of AOE here.
Agree with that, and, if rulemaking has to be moved from the state board to the AOE, the advisory board is critical,
Is what,
critical
okay.
to the process. There isn't any question in my mind at all.
So are we
My question, just to be clear, my question was whether if we move to the state board and resource the state board for rulemaking, would we need an advisory board? Because they're a similar makeup. And all I'm trying to do is consolidate it to where the needs be. If we're going to move rulemaking to AOE, I feel we definitely need an advisory board.
yeah, but I think you're right, I think we probably have to have one regardless.
Yeah, well, that may very well be true, but it could be a different role for them.
I'm trying to figure out if it's worth pivoting to then who's on it.
Yeah.
We're in
Yeah, I don't-
agreement.
I- I- I feel like
Yes,
we're-
I thought
Being
the
enough
decision had already
conversation.
been made, that's why I pivoted.
Yeah, because then we need to talk about composition and,
And their duties.
and compensation.
I'm less worried about that, but yeah.
Yeah, I do think that regardless of where it lies, the advisory board is necessary, because no matter what even if the board gets it, they don't dabble in construction, they don't, like, they can, but like, they both, I think, would need the assistance
Yeah.
of an advisory committee. I think it's,
I guess I asked that because I want to draw out that we have the chair of the state board or designee as one of the members. There is,
Yes.
it's not the same, but there is a nexus here. We are saying the state board is not completely unrelated to this. They are actually sitting on this budget.
Well, so-
We could go to,
Yeah,
The who?
yeah, I would, you know, this speaks for
I'm
the
in
work
a-
that you guys did this summer.
flesh it out here today.
Yeah.
They're done.
All right,
Check out the list.
leave the talk on composition.
So in coming back to this again, and when we did this work in the summer, transformation was a more abstract
Mhm.
than I think where we find ourselves now. So I look at this list and I have a couple of thoughts in mind. I'd like us to try to make it even smaller, because I think we're just struggling with big groups and boards, so I don't think we can make it a lot smaller, but I'd love to cut it. I am, at this time, relooking at it, unpersuaded of why the commissioner of BGS would need to be on it. And I am
Buildings and
Buildings.
grounds.
thinking about whether somebody from this is gonna tie back to the other bigger conversation, but I think why these pieces are all tied is like pointing to the blank board, because in my mind it exists. Is there a nexus here to someone from the commission? That's, I think, part of our bigger conversation too, is gonna be, is the commission gonna actually have a role in?
Commission on the Future of Public Ed.
Commission on the Future of Public Ed. And so I would prefer to see a voice like that is more involved in the bigger transformation work,
Agreed.
than BGS.
The commission's life only goes until January.
Well, but you don't see it on the board?
Was that?
The life extension?
The blank.
It's all in there.
What's in that? I would just say, I agree with you, smaller, better, more nimble. You know, it's actually not a big group.
I would actually be, I'm
It's
sorry.
eight.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah.
I would actually be open to adding that. I know, because I think aren't we at an even
Yes.
number
Yeah,
anyways?
so I wanna go down.
Right, but I think having, well, I don't think removing the other position is the way to go. I think that'll have a lot of insight, discussion involved with the buildings in our state. I think they should still stay on there, so
I
I'd be
hear
open.
you, except I don't think they have anything to do with school building, like BGF, you know,
Maybe they-
districts
should
handle.
they? Maybe they should.
But they may, that may
And
change.
then we're talking about,
So, and as we move forward, maybe they should be more involved with the buildings. But I'd be open to adding as long as the commission is still, commission at that point.
I guess I really want the eyes that as we get more into the like transformation work and bigger conversation we're gonna have about the blank board, we're gonna get VSA back in here, the superintendents next week. I joined their trustees meeting yesterday. There's so many people on the ground that have a clear sense of like, if we could change a few things structurally, these three schools could be brought together fairly easily. You could have a
Yes.
wing here. If we did this thing here, and I want those eyes, that voice. And it's maybe, you know, it's depending on who the speaker and the committees pick too, but there's people who understand the logical, some of the easiest low hanging fruit. Nothing is easy, easiest, like logical ways that we can be reconfiguring buildings that will drive education and that will drive some of our bigger goals around, you know, scale and equity of opportunities. So that's like the perspective to me, that's that and the financial part of where does it make the most sense to put our dollars is super important. And we can't put JFO in here, right? Can we?
Staff.
Yeah.
Staff it.
Right.
Okay.
So I would say to that, we have 4 members to be appointed by the General Assembly. And I wonder if
Yeah, I
that
guess then
doesn't
that's-
satisfy that.
Maybe it does.
We could more clearly define what's there.
Should we make it 5 by the General Assembly? If that's what here you don't have that even number we talked about.
Yes, but then we run into, who
Right.
gets the odd
Got it.
number.
Got it.
We have more people, we get more. Excellent.
So, with what Rep Taylor said, I think I would be open to adding a member, but I would not put it as one of the 4 that are appointed for that reason. Because I think it is important to have someone, buildings and general services. I mean, the way we do it in Vermont,
Yeah.
it's true, but not all states do it that way. I mean, some go through the capital bill, some have to do it different, deal with school
Go
buildings
to
in a different way.
Right, which is how we used to do, I mean, the whole, that's the, I think the challenge is that we're talking about a different paradigm of the program that moves away from that.
Right.
And so does
But
it
we
feel
have
like a little
that
bit of a relic of the old system if we're trying to move to a new system? To have, and I don't have a strong feeling on
Right.
PGS, I'm just overall interested in fewer, I'm
Right.
fearful, whatever, if we make it bigger, they're gonna make it even bigger in the Senate. And so,
Wow.
I wonder if there's a way to work it, I'm sorry, go.
Well, actually, Ellie had her hand up,
sorry.
but now it's down. You're all.
Well, I mean, we'll go ahead.
Go ahead, Josh.
I have some-
How about we have, we have the board, someone from the board or a designee. How about we have someone from the AOE or a designee, and then we have minds
No.
from both.
Well, this
They're
is to
advising
advise.
the AOE, so
Right.
it's a nat, like they're already. I think that's why, because I thought of that too, but they're literally to sort of work arm in arm with the AOE, so.
It's more the commission.
Rob, go ahead.
They want
I just,
someone from
just
that.
a technical question, because I don't know. So whenever a town wants to build a school and they take a bond and the state kind of helps them with that.
They take a
Doesn't,
bond, period.
doesn't.
Okay,
Yeah, they float a bond, yeah.
okay, so they float a bond, they take on the debt,
Well,
they,
If
they,
this program were implemented, then the state would
yes, however,
Okay.
possibly
they,
help them.
the education fund takes on the debt.
Should it
Currently.
be
Yes,
treasurer or bonding, but not both?
it's,
Does he need one of them?
they front, the education fund fronts the money, but the town has to pay it back. The town,
no, the towns don't,
No.
the
District.
school districts do it.
excuse, yes,
Uh,
okay.
and when yes, the bond payment becomes part of their budget,
That's right.
Right.
but you have to remember that that budget is funded by the statewide education fund, which we all contribute to. So yes, the burden of paying it back falls mostly on the district taxpayers bond.
Yeah.
But not entirely.
Right.
We are all paying a little
Okay.
bit for Burlington. Which is our most recent bond.
That's the amazing
That's the most recent big
Can
bond.
I further complicate that
So
by
complicated.
painful amount?
Yeah.
That I believe is an extraordinarily unresolved issue in the notion of a foundation formula, which is a very different way of funding.
Yes,
Right? That is like sort of seems what we're moving towards, that is not at all included in any of the assumptions or the modeling we have so far. And there's not like, does this exist completely outside of, there's gonna be a lot of financial details to work out here. Does this exist completely outside of a foundation formula as this like standalone state pot of money
And is there a?
or not? So
In the end.
everything is.
You make me want to bury my head in my hands.
Yes, I know. I mean, that,
But it
this
is-
is this is a huge.
It's
I
probably
don't think
why I
we're
had
gonna
my
solve
hand
this
up.
here, so that's why we need to move like the next step forward, but a lot of this is extreme, I mean, the shift to a foundation formula changes the game completely about how we fund education, and so this is gonna be directly impacted or.
Yeah. Well, not to pass the buck, but that is an issue for which needs to figure out.
Yes.
I think we need to figure out what can happen.
She was,
Passing the buck. I do think that like regardless of if there's a foundation from it or are we business as usual or in perpetuity, it should be taken out. I think it should be its own separate piece because it will always be a struggle to fund it through through education funding, the way we do it now.
Yeah.
I think that having it through, I don't know where, because it's not my forte, but whether it be general, whatever, somewhere it should have its own life. Because then I think you can fund it easier, you can make more arguments for it. And I think it's harder when the education cost is so high and then you add the construction into it, people's eyes are gonna.
Yes, very hard. I don't think we're gonna go away from being funded from the education fund, unless we do away with the education fund completely,
that's the only other.
which isn't such a bad idea in some ways as well.
Mhm.
And with
I
that
know
said,
Kate.
there are things in the ed fund that we could kick out of the ed fund to create space.
But there's also probably this
Yes, all of the above.
potentially this messy interim, right, of like.
Right.
I feel strongly that we need to get this going as fast as possible, partially just because it's been neglected for so long, like setting aside consolidation, just the fair condition of buildings is absolutely an emergency, but then some of this might start happening before, if we are able to
Just all this
redistrict
other
and
stuff.
consolidate and have new districts, something might happen here before that happens. So we're in a real messy.
Can wording be inserted as a mechanism for if there is a change in the funding world of education, that mechanism starts a conversation about that section to make the change, right? So we can move forward based on what we have, and should there be a
So-
new foundation formula that says, now go.
I would just say that what we're talking about here is only what would be a state contribution to a much larger project.
Right.
So we're not talking about funding entire projects from this, but figuring out where the state's role is. The bonus points and priority that would be worked out by the advisory group and the AOE, I think would address, we'll have to take into account the future state. And even if we pass this tomorrow, it's a 2-year ramp in anyway. And with all the tariffs on steel and aluminum, nobody can afford to build anything anyway, but, go ahead, Chris.
I'm going here.
Are we adding a person to the advisory committee?
Thank you.
That's my hand was up for the same.
Back to the task at hand.
So
I spiraled us
You
way
did,
out
you
of
did,
control.
you did.
My question was, can we go back to that question and exactly what the concern was about? I know there was a proposal to reduce it by one
Yes.
and increase it by one, and I agree that 8 isn't always the best. I'm not as hung up as you are, Brady, about the number, because for me, 8 and 4, 4 of them are ex officios. And And if we were going to reduce it by one, I thought your suggestion about the treasurer and the bond bank role could be combined
It could be
in one or the
either.
other. I think that
A
is
designee
probably
from one of
true.
them. Yeah.
Or yeah, whatever, but I don't think 8 is the problem, and I'm not even having a problem with adding.
This is not a hill I'm gonna die on.
Yeah.
I prefer to reduce by one, over increase by one, but not a hill. I'm gonna die on.
Kate,
I also really like the idea of calling out specifically a member of BSA. So I wonder if maybe that could get worked into,
Superintendent's Association.
yeah, the Speaker of the House part or the Committee of Committees where we ask them to pick
Maybe instead of
Somebody who
supervisory union.
right,
because
maybe
that
a
concept, it should-
superintendent.
It should be
I,
an appointee from the BSA.
I think from the field is absolutely,
Yes.
I think we aren't specific enough, I
Right.
don't
all right,
think.
so,
I agree.
Educators are pretty,
yeah, it's broad
Okay,
term.
we do have,
Classroom teacher.
we have.
public.
All right,
This one's.
think about, what can we tell John right now? That we will stick with 8, we can go to 7 and drop the treasurer or the bond bank, I would say that probably the treasurer.
I would say the same.
This bond bank is
Grab
more
the bond
more
bank.
important in this case. This group can always get
Change.
advice from whoever they need to get
Yes.
advice from.
True.
And they obviously will.
And I'm also hearing, support for that among those being appointed by the General Assembly, we might want to be a little more prescriptive about, we could say, in consultation with, or we could be very specific and say a superintendent.
If we are, clarifying question that I don't know the answer, are retired superintendents, do they stay part of the VSA? So if we say a member of the VSA, does it, because superintendents
Current
might
or
be too
retired.
busy,
Right.
but a
well,
retired
Oh, is
superintendent
it
might be
BSA or
perfect.
designee?
Current or retired.
Just say
Or-
current or former.
I mean,
member.
NEA
Or
members,
designee.
right, are also retired. People can still be members.
You can choose to, you are not automatically though.
But a designee gets to the same
Yeah.
outcome because you're still answering to the group who designated you, right?
So that would be adding a person.
No,
No,
changing.
no.
Switching out that
Supervisory.
supervisory
about-
union.
Okay, so,
BSA designee,
2 members appointed by the speaker,
one of whom.
one of whom shall be,
A VSA
a
designee.
member of the Vermont Superintendent Association
Or
or
designee,
designee.
yeah.
Okay.
Instead of supervisory union.
All right,
How about
we'll,
adding-
we'll stay at 8.
how about
Are we getting
making
rid of
it-
the
How
treasurer?
about,
Oh, we're taking up the treasurer.
Oh, did we agree to that?
no, well, how about
I'm okay with it.
we leave it as it is? And then add a 9th one who is the member or designee of the VSA as another person.
Yeah.
Its own standing.
I think it's tricky because
Cut it down.
then every organization is gonna want their own
Right.
designee as well.
Right.
But
think-
still like a way to keep it in, to go to 9, because I do agree with.
We're talking about 7 here. This is a very, interesting discussion because usually the Democrats like lots of
I know.
people on
Yeah.
commissions.
I
We're trying
know,
to shrink it.
you heard me say I don't mind if we.
Yes.
I would rather shrink it as well, because again, it's capacity issues. You know, this is not their full-time job.
No.
You know, I know how difficult it is to get anybody to serve on any board. So you have the same person on, like myself, on 5 different boards.
Okay, so for
Less
our next
is better.
version, let's, pull the treasurer
Yep,
and have the language we just gave you.
agreed.
All right.
I'll email you guys about, I guess practicalities like timing and preparation into other bills, just so we're on the same page, but
Gotcha.
I'm happy
Okay.
to come back whenever you guys, need.
We're changing who calls the first meeting to order if we pull the treasurer, just so you know.
Oh,
too.
see, these little things.
Why don't we say that the chair of the state board of education.
Yeah, I mean,
calls the
I
person.
didn't know whether you
I'm
wanted
fine
to
with
say
that.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's fine with me.
One of the big unresolved from the summer group is legislators, so we're all okay with no legislators.
I think it should be no legislators.
Period.
Yes.
I tried to do that with the
Never.
commission,
Well,
but failed.
I do wonder something about what Kate said. I don't know whether you were being serious, but where it does say educator, should it say public school educator?
School classroom teacher.
I think we're changing that anyway.
We did, that's
We
that's
didn't-
line
That's
20.
the committee and committees.
public
Oh,
school
okay.
classroom.
That's-
Yeah, I guess I'm not.
And does it have to be a current educator? That also be current or former?
I think so.
Because again, a retired teacher might have.
It is
more
a vague
time.
term.
I mean, I think
Yeah.
Well, and
Leon's
you know,
point is
where
well
you-
taken.
yeah, I hear the word public educator, but like, there are teachers who've worked in both
Right.
public and independent. So
in that-
now you're, you know, you're.
Well, this is public school.
Construction, so-
Construction.
That's right.
Yeah.
So.
Right, what I'm
So,
should be a
so it
public
probably
school
should be a
educator.
public school educator.
I assume principal would fall under.
Or any.
Yeah.
It's like
Well, so
Educators,
fair enough.
yeah.
principals, are better,
Principals,
you know, it's-
my,
they're really
my
the ones
superintendent
that
used to be a
deal
teacher.
with this stuff usually.
That's a good thing.
Well, we changed it for the two members appointed by the Speaker of the House. We could change this, shall be a building principal.
Mm,
BPA.
They have, again, I'm happy with the whole, if you're a retired person who's not trying to pull down a full-time job on top of
Right.
this.
BPA or designee.
Well, then it would have to be BPA or designee or BSA or designee.
Well, I would say for the next version, why don't you use the same language that we did for BSA and they did BPA?
Okay.
Principal associate.
All right, we'll take a 3-minute break for my benefit. Back here at 10.